Here we've got a photo that is taken from deep inside the earth. This is Mammoth Cave National Park, and leading up to this trip, I knew that I wanted to bring my Fuji for a couple reasons. Number one, it was small, or it is small, and a DSLR is just, it's big. And I think, if I brought my Nikon D750 plus a 35mm lens, I would have had basically the same field of view as the Fuji. And I would have gotten similar pictures, except that Nikon really does great in low light. It focuses well in low light, and it's got really good high ISO. So I knew the Fuji would be a trade-off. But I brought it anyway because I just wanted the size of the Fuji. I didn't want the bulk and heft of a DSLR. Plus, the Fuji has that silent shutter, or nearly silent shutter, with the leaf shutter. It's silent for all intents and purposes. So I brought it on our trip to Mammoth Cave, and I was pretty impressed with it. The one thing that it didn't really, the one thing that, I guess two things that kind of brought the experience down a little bit were the focusing. The automatic focus is just not good on that Fuji compared to DSLRs. It's slow and it hunts for a while. And that was an issue sometimes in Mammoth Cave because there's no light. It's all artificial. This photo would be black except for the artificial lights. And even then, it was super dim. This is a RAW file that's been heavily processed. And in the original, you can just see a couple spots of light. You can't see anything else. But the Fuji was able to recover a ton of shadow detail. And I've also applied a lot of noise reduction here. So if you zoom into 100%, you'll see it's not as detailed as it would be otherwise, but you get the point, certainly in this picture, without all I think it works out just fine, despite being taken with a crop sensor Fuji instead of a full-frame Nikon. The other thing that I wish this Fuji had, which isn't really a strike against it per se, it's just because it's not really an option, is a stabilized, I wish it had image stabilization, in this case, a stabilized image sensor. And there are some mirrorless cameras that have stabilized image sensors, but none of them have the same qualities that I like about the Fuji, like the leaf shutter and other things. So it would have been nice to take this photo with a camera that focused a little better and had a stabilized, I keep thinking shutter, but it's not shutter, a stabilized image sensor. But that's not the case. And as such, I found myself taking a lot of photos in rapid succession, so using drive mode, hoping that one would be in focus, and also trying to hold as still as I possibly could. I used high ISO on these, this one and a couple others that you might see on my Flickr. They're shot at ISO 6400, and I wanted to use as fast as a shutter speed or as slow as a shutter speed I could, without getting motion blur. So I think this was shot at a 30th or maybe a 60th of a second. And there's a lot of my photos that turned out just a little blurry because of that. But a stabilized image sensor would have let me shoot at much lower shutter speeds. As was the case, in the end, if you're going to Mammoth Cave, I'd recommend a Fuji, or I'd recommend another camera with a stabilized image sensor. Either way, I do think the size made a big difference. I barely saw any DSLRs in this trip because it's just cumbersome to take them through these caves. So it was fun to try it with the Fuji and see what I was able to get out of it.